Welcome to this week's Pascal's China Lens. We're going to talk about the Winter Olympic Games in China, in Beijing, starting February 4th. It's going to be really amazing, but most of the people in the world don't think so. They don't like the fact that China's hosting these games. So what's going on and what is it that we're missing about these games by only looking at the negative side and not look at what China's really doing or trying to transform during those games? If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do so. I have already almost 100 videos online about China, and every week I'm going to post more. So let's start with a story about the Winter Olympics and what to expect. 4th of February, on Friday, 2022, we're going to have the Winter Olympic Games starting in Beijing. It's going to last until the 20th of February. And then in March, the same period, we're going to have the Paralympic Games. It's going to be very exciting to see. And the whole world should be watching, but somehow it gets very little attention. And when it gets attention, it's not that positive. So what's happening? Because this is very unusual in the preparation of any games, anytime. Even Tokyo had much more attention on what they were going to do. So I'm going to reveal some of that. But one of the issues is political. And Thomas Bach, the president of the IOC, said very, very clearly that there's no place for politics into the Olympic spirit. But regardless what he says, the opposite happened. And so there was a lot of people trying to boycott the games everywhere in the world, specifically in the West. This was, of course, about human rights, about Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, about Tibet, about Hong Kong. I mean, we know the stories. Lately, it was about Peng Shuai and the sexual allegation. And even when she said, I'm fine, and you didn't read it correctly what I wrote, and this is all stories from the West that you're making up, and just stop it, people don't believe it anymore. People don't believe China anymore. People don't trust China's words anymore. I've written a book about that. But that is the real issue. And then Biden at one point said, well, we're just going to do a diplomatic boycott. No diplomats will go to Beijing. And so Beijing reacted furiously, really angry, and saying, well, that's fine if you don't want to come. I mean, we hadn't sent out the invitations anyway, so that saves us on invitation sending. But they were probably very upset that Washington would take that decision, specifically because other countries started to follow. Think about UK, they followed, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, all the English native-speaking languages, they almost all followed. And then even in Europe, you have Lithuania, but you also have Estonia, you have Denmark, and lately even Belgium, the country where I'm from, has decided not to send any diplomats. That's very sad for me, because I believe, just like Macron says, it's going to be very insignificant. I mean, boycotting the Olympics is not going to make any difference. We even added some scare tactics in Belgium, saying don't take your laptops or take your cell phones with you, they're going to hack or spy on it. Totally untrue. But that is the story you hear. And then in Canada, they say don't go to the athletes because you might get imprisoned. I mean, there's a lot of scare tactics. But I believe, just like Macron says, I mean, it's not going to make any difference and it's not part of the Olympic spirit. So why are we doing it? Well, it's not the first time. If we look at 2008, the Summer Olympic Games in Beijing, well, there was already a lot of boycotts as well. It was about Tibet, also Xinjiang. I mean, same stories. Not Hong Kong at that time yet, but there was a lot of stories around that. So it's not the first time. This is a déjà vu for China and for the world. Now, the audience will be very different. The difference in 2008 was that this was really putting China and Beijing on a world stage to show we are a superpower, and they succeeded with the Olympics to do that. A fantastic opening and closing ceremony. Now, this is going to be domestically. People can't fly in as easily into China. There's still a zero COVID tolerance policy, and so only people living in China or athletes, their staff, and of course some diplomats that want to come, they will be part of the audience, and Putin will go for sure, and Xi Jinping will be there, and so it's going to be very high level, but yeah, Biden will be missed or not missed, I don't know, but that is the reality. The audience is different, and that also means that the communication is different. It also means that the budget is very different. If we look at the budget of the Summer Olympics, this was more than $40 billion. And now it's only 3.9 billion. It's still a lot of money, but that's 10% or less than 10% of the cost of the 2008 Olympics. But even if we look at the global sponsors, you very much clearly see how silent they are. And that's because of their silence that we're not getting the news into the West, into the rest of the world. They don't dare to talk much about it because they don't know, should I be pro or contra anything that China does on human rights and so on. And so they'd rather be silent. Even Alibaba is very silent on it. And that's unusual as well, because this is their prime time. They've been spending so much money to be front page, and they're not. And so what you see is that the signal to noise level, or ratio, as we call it in electronics, is very, very low. What it means is that we're getting lots of noise about human rights, about allegations, about problems. We're not getting the signals or the facts of how great these Olympics will be. And so that is telling me something about this political tension right now. And I just want to give some facts, or at least give some signals and not just noise. And so if we look at some of the facts, I mean, there's 3 big cities where the Olympics will be held. In Beijing, of course, most of the events will be held there. And then there's going to be in Yanqing and also in Zhangjiakou, about 170 kilometers north of Beijing. And so this is going to be very amazing because they've been constructing some really cool stuff. But besides that, there's going to be 91 countries participating, which is quite a lot for Winter Olympics. And 2,900 athletes, and they're going to compete in 109 different events out of 15 different disciplines, like skiing and curling and of course skating. So this is going to be very interesting to see the whole 2 weeks of events happening. Now, if we look at the past, what we see is that Chinese athletes have been very good in about 6 of those 15 disciplines, but very good is maybe an overstatement because they've only started like 11 times ago. It is the 11th edition, so they started in 1980, and the first 6 editions out of the 11, they didn't win any gold medals, and very few medals in total. It's only in the past 5 editions that they started to win some medals. Now, China's never been a winter sport nation, and so that just changed 5 editions ago. And they won sometimes 9, sometimes 8, sometimes 11, I mean, depending on the year. But reality is that even last year in South Korea, they only got like 1 gold medal and 9 medals in total, which is not that much. So they will have to prove this time that they did better. And I believe they will do much better. Why do I believe that? I mean, they've been hiring foreign coaches to really train their athletes. They've gone more disciplines than before, and they've been promoting this for the past 5 years, since 2015 when they won the bid, to everybody in China and saying you have to become a winter sport athlete. And so there's a lot of change happening. Budgets didn't matter too much. The big difference with this games and previous games, however, is that the emphasis is more on health than it is on competition and winning. But knowing Chinese, I mean, their DNA is really competitive, so they're going to want to win anyway, and they worked really hard towards that. But I think it's going to be successful for China, or they're going to make a lot of noise about it, if they win more than 11 medals or 12 medals, because that will be the first time that they've beaten their 11 medals in total, and specifically when they win a lot of gold medals. And I think it's going to happen, but we'll see in the next 2 weeks what will happen. Now, China is now creating, and that needs some attention, the safest and greenest games ever. And we don't talk about it, but we should pay attention to it. Because on the safe side, I mean, this is still COVID-19 period. And so they have this zero tolerance policy, or COVID zero tolerance policy. And so they've created a lot of technology around it, like a chip that can monitor your temperature constantly to make sure that if your temperature is too high, immediately doctors or someone can come to you and see if you would have COVID, would be infected, and then put you in another bubble. I mean, this is full of bubbles, this whole Olympics. And the whole Olympics in itself is one big bubble on itself. But also robots are everywhere. Even when you eat, it's robots. They don't want to have too much connection between people. I mean, it's not really the Olympic spirit to be all sitting apart, but the reality is we have to be careful, and China wants to be careful. So robots there, but also robots to disinfect, robots to actually check on temperatures, robots on the skiing areas. I mean, everything is all about robots this year. And we're going to see a lot of announcements during these next 2 weeks. What's also cool is about the sustainability. They have the first time that an Olympic game will be 100% green. And I think this should be the standard for all the games in the future. But China is the first one to set this standard with wind and solar energy. And so they've calculated everything, and there's going to be zero CO2 emission on the whole games. Of course, they're going to probably plant a lot of trees to make up for some of the construction, but the reality is this is a 100% green Olympic game. It's going to be very eco-friendly, which means that there's a lot of biodegradable things that have been put in place, but also the buses, 100% of all the passenger vehicles will be electrical, hydrogen or batteries, so EVs, electrical vehicles, with lithium-ion batteries. It's going to be completely eco-friendly. And so I think this is a great symbol for the future. One of the things that they did is to reuse most of the venues from 2008 Summer Olympics to make sure they didn't have to do more constructions on many more venues. And this is very smart and also very useful. So I think the sustainability aspect of this games is going to be something to watch. But somehow, very few people are talking about it. Now, the other thing is that it's going to be the most digital games ever. Now, China and digital, you know my stories, it's all about that. And the last year has been crazy of what things have happened. But there's a few things that China is really launching now at these games, which is going to be quite unique. First thing is a lot of mini apps. There's going to be educational format. So they're trying to educate the Chinese about Winter Olympics, about winter sport, and about healthcare, and about health in general for the body. And so doing sports, winter sports, is good for the health of the population. Their aim, China's aim, is to get 300 million Chinese to do winter sports in the next 10 to 15 years. I mean, this is crazy in amount. I mean, it's more than the whole America or the whole Europe, but that is their aim. Everybody needs to be doing winter sports. I mean, 300 million. Now that's going to be cool, and they're doing that through educational games, specifically to children, because they will be the first one to adopt these new games and also adopt to this new type of sports, winter sports. The other thing is about streaming, and this is something quite interesting in China, because right now for the Olympics they will have 8K ultra high definition streaming, broadcasting happening in real time throughout the whole China. And this through 5G is going to be very, very fast. What it means is that anybody anywhere in China can follow on his cell phone the games in real time, in 360 degree almost, and interactive, so you can even buy things or replay things. I mean, it's going to be crazy, but this is the level of sophistication in digital that China has today. And they want to display that, not just for the world, but for every Chinese as well, and to have them be part of this experience. The central bank digital currency, the new electronic CNY or new yuan, the Chinese currency, is getting launched pretty much at the Olympic Games, the Winter Olympics. I mean, for more than a year it's been in test in many cities, but now we see that they're getting very, very serious about it. I've made another video about that before if you want to see more about that. Reality is, this is going to change China from a digital point of view. Because once money is completely digital, and China is very close as becoming a cashless society, then the whole society will have maybe 7 to 10 years a head start towards the rest of the world, specifically when they combine that with 5G, they combine it with IoT, with blockchain. I mean, too many stories. But the reality is, already 30 million people have downloaded the app from the central bank to actually receive and pay with this currency. And everybody that is selling something at the Olympic Games already accepts this central bank digital currency. So it's going very, very fast from now on. 5G, you see self-driving cars everywhere. And yes, there's already 500 million connections on 5G in China. I mean, it's going to be all 5G what we talk about. And so this is what I call the digital new normal. And the Winter Olympics is really the first moment where the digital new normal is getting set. And that means that what China sets as a standard for the next 10 years is now starting at this Winter Olympics to be displayed everywhere and become the norm for the future. In 2008 we had the same, but then it was a real infrastructure. Think about the high-speed trains, think about the highways, think about all these things, bridges and so on. Right now it's all about digital. And so we have to look at the Winter Olympics to understand how fast and how far China is going. Now the other thing is there's always, like China, the coolest infrastructure that they're building. High-speed trains, since 2008, they've now built this high-speed train all the way from Beijing to Zhangjiakou, 170 kilometers away. In 45 minutes you get there at 350 kilometers an hour. I mean, we know these stories. This is not special. What is special is that they've refitted this whole high-speed train to make sure that it could receive 5G contents continuously without interruption. And so if you take that train, or an athlete takes that train to the Olympic Village, or maybe to Zhangjiakou to compete, they will be able to watch on their phone and even on a big screen in the high-speed train every game that is being broadcasted in real time in 8K ultra high definition. And although there's like 13 tunnels and 2 bridges, it's not going to be interrupted. They even created a broadcasting environment inside the train for CGTN to actually broadcast all the things that are happening around the Olympics. So really cool. And this is the first time it's going to be the standard for the future. Every train, high-speed train in China in the future will have 5G uninterrupted connection everywhere throughout the country. And that is the standard. There's also cool venues like the sliding venue in Yanqing. There's the ice ribbon venue in Beijing, the skating, which has the biggest saddle roof in the world, like 200 meters wide. I mean, you will see these pictures as they talk about the Olympics or at the opening ceremony, but that will be at the Bird Nest. It won't be in those 2 other cities. It will be at the Bird Nest, the one that was used during the Summer Olympics. And then they're also going to use the Winter Olympics to showcase innovation. And so what China did over the past years was to call for tenders and call any innovator in China and say, if you have something cool to show at the Olympics, now's your moment to do it. And so lots of people actually wanted to participate, or they participated. And so there's certain selections. And so there's things like wind tunnels, there's like better weather forecasting and so on. Lots of technology and innovation that is getting displayed at the Winter Olympics. But very few people talk about it. I think this is going to be breathtaking. I mean, it's going to be similar to the Summer Olympics, but because they're reusing some of the venues, it's not going to be so much about infrastructure and more about the digital change as well as the innovation that China has been making. Now, the question is, of course, what do we make about all this? And I believe we should listen about what Charles Dickens once said in A Tale of Two Cities to understand the situation we're in when it comes to the Winter Olympic Games. He said, and that was like in 1857, I believe it was, he said, "It's the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity or disbelief. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair." And so for me, this says it all. This is the situation with China. And so the question that we could ask ourselves, is this really a spring of hope or is it a winter of despair? And it all depends on what you look at. Now, he was talking about 2 cities, which was Paris and London. I now think we should talk about Washington and Beijing. But it's the same story. I mean, Washington sees it as a winter of despair. China sees it as a spring of hope. And so the Beijing Winter Olympics, for all the Chinese, in my view, and we're talking about 1.4 billion people, are going to be the start of the spring season. Not just Spring Festival, which is the start right now, but actually the spring and the hope for a better future. And so these Winter Olympics, although the West sees it as insignificant, is maybe one of the most significant moments in history for China. But because all of it will be digital and it's going to be internal, the world probably won't notice. I believe we have to start watching what's happening in China right now at the Winter Olympics and look at the details. Look at the signals. Don't look at the noise. And of course, in my book, Can We Trust China? I write a lot of things about that, how we actually have to take a different lens and a different view on China to understand why the spring has just begun. See you next week for another episode on Pascal's China Lens.